Hello! Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I am Richard, the channel is called New Memphis, and I am so glad that you could be here today. This week we are finally finishing up the Kolourful Killaboss on Great Gnashtoof, I believe is what they call it, but we're just going to call it a warg because, let's be honest here, that's clearly what it is. In the last episode, we started doing the actual base coats and then got the wash done. The base coats being what I lovingly refer to as the McDonald's toy phase of painting, where things look pretty rough. And then the blue wash, which is the part that just confuses the hell out of Reddit. But now we're finishing up the actual highlights and we're getting everything tabletop ready. It has been a very, very long process, but that's okay. Honestly, the best models tend to be, usually. And I'm just really excited to have this guy ready for the wall and ready to go stomp some Stormcast Eternals. So if you guys are down for that, this is, might end up being kind of a short episode because it's just highlights, but I hope you enjoy it. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe if, and only if, you like the content, you like what I'm doing here, and you want to see the channel continue, because I would like to one day make this a full-time job and to get to paint for you guys and celebrate hobbying in general. So if you want to help me do that, like I said, mash those buttons down below, consider joining the Patreon, and in the meantime, I think it's just about time that we actually get started on the model. I knew I should have made some lemonade beforehand for this. At least we're not in the middle of yet another heat wave in August. I'm just hoping we can actually get some nice fall weather. Fall is the best time in the Midwest. It really is. One day I'm going to stop being impressed with how good this looks. One day. One day. Let's get started. And to start out with, we're going to break out the deep yellow. Like I said, this might end up being kind of a short video, but it'll be an entertaining one if nothing else. The deep yellow, I think, in the McDonald's toy phase, which is after base coats, pre-wash, is probably the paint that looks the worst, especially because it's really streaky when putting it over any type of primer. But having done several layers since then, now is when it comes together. This is the paint that when doing the final highlights goes from looking the worst to looking the absolute best, and I love it for that reason. I know it is kind of heretical, actually very heretical, to not use green skin for the green skins, but I'm sorry guys, they just look so good. And eventually I'll probably do a Cruel Boys armor that does use green skin, but I just need to figure out what to use for the actual, maybe like a brown for the clothing. And maybe I'll make a video brainstorming how to actually do that later. But for right now, like I said, even though it goes against the lore, the yellow does look absolutely amazing. And I try to hit a sweet spot where the paint is sort of globbed on enough that you have those hard lines to make those really intense shadows to give it that sort of comic book feel, but not globbed on so thick that you have literal raised bubbles of paint after it's dry. And I wish I could tell you that there was some official procedure to how I do that. Mostly it's just practice and doing it over again until you get it right. Then moving on to the most boring part of the highlights, which is the flat green. However, it is still one of my favorites, and it did end up pairing very well with that light green that we used on the armor panels for the warg. Having those little flecks of light green showing through actually was very good, so I'm happy with how that turned out. But the purpose of the flat green, ultimately, it's meant to counterbalance my biggest issue with the Cruel Boys as a faction. And I'm laying all this out because I know that the flatness of the areas that have those flat green highlights has been kind of a sticking point. My biggest issue with the Cruel Boys is that they are hideously over-designed. Terribly, horribly over-designed. With not only the armor panels and then the cloth sections and then a bunch of like severed heads and like tongues and worms and like human skin sections. It's no. It all needs to be rolled back. Plus I want the eye being drawn to, you know, the model's face and to the mount's face and to that big shield. Those are the areas where I want the eye being immediately drawn. With the rest of the model being so busy, I use the flat green as a highlight, both because it looks good with the blue, I think, but also because it tones everything back, so that then when you see the entire model finished, your eye is immediately drawn to the actual Killaboss's face, or the mount, you know, not to the cacophony of severed human body parts all over, just being way too busy across the midsection of the model. Moving on to something less substantive though, we then did break out the black red to use as a highlight on the wooden sections. I wasn't originally going to do this, but I think it ended up tying everything together. The actual reddish hues of the black red really do help that wood to stand out and feel unique, you know, as a texture alongside the rest of the model, especially alongside those blue undertones. And then the cork brown sections were the next thing, which again, I did not originally intend to highlight, but the long cloth sections really do add to the sort of dripping motif the Cruel Boys have. And so any opportunity to capitalize that is something that I always like to take. And the cork brown sections in this case were something that really needed it because it helps to elongate them. Then we get on to the London Gray, and I have to admit, the pairing of London Gray highlights with the blue undertones from that royal blue wash looks so good that I actually want to use it on a future project. If anyone knows any Space Marine chapter, because I don't know 40k, but any Space Marine chapter or a chapter of Guardsmen that use gray as a color and wouldn't be heretical to have blue undertones on them, please leave it down in the comment section. I would love to know more about it because I'm so happy with the London Gray and Royal Blue combination that I actually do want to use it on something else. If nothing else, I might end up using it on some stone trolls, maybe do some highlights of white, you know, something like that, or maybe skinks, like lizard men, that could also be cool. Something with a highly textured skin could work. Next up, just a little bit of white. White is something I always want to use very, very sparingly, but fortunately, not using very much black on the model actually helps the white to stand out more. Weirdly enough, I have found that getting away from using Null Noil and Agrax Earthshade has done a lot to help my white stand out. The blue undertones actually pair really well with it. So we're going to use it on all the nails, the teeth, as well as the little skull that's hanging off the Killaboss. It's really, really cute. It's down at the bottom. I don't know why I find that cute, but all the severed heads are gross. Maybe just says something about me. I don't know. Should look into that. We're also going to use white as a base coat on all the weapons. These are eventually going to be the same cherry red that we've used on the Killaboss on foot and his weapons, but in order to get them eventually to be really, really bright red, we're going to start out with a base coat of white. Like I said, we want that hot rod cherry red, and that's going to require a white base coat beforehand to really, really get that popping red. But once that had all night to dry, we can move on to the dark vermilion highlights, which was probably my second favorite thing after the highlights on the skin, the deep yellow. These turned out so good, and this was the point where I said, yeah, you know what, this model's gonna be something special. This is really special. This is great. This is so good. It's so good. Next up, just a little bit of black wash. I'm gonna use that in the mouths of the Killaboss, the mouth of the Warg, and the mouth of the shield face, which is adorable. I love it. And in case you're wondering, I'm not using Null Noil or a Games Workshop black. I'm literally just taking a little bit of Vallejo black, mixing it with some matte medium and water until it's the right consistency, and just applying it. It works great. This amount of matte medium is about $9. Mix that with some water and a literal dab of Vallejo black paint, and then I don't even mind throwing half of it away. It's so much cheaper than Null Noil. It's ridiculous. It is a much more intense black, though. You gotta be careful with it, so I would say that's the one thing to be careful of. If you're gonna use a Vallejo paint to sort of mix washes on the fly like I do, they are going to be intense compared to Games Workshop's washes. So be on the lookout for that. They are cheaper, and I like them more personally because I like intense washes, but they are intense. Back to white, we're into the highlights on the weapons now, and boy do I wish I could give you like an official procedure for this, but ultimately what I start out doing with these is just get along all of the blades, everywhere I want to be sharp with a little bit of white, then go into some dry brushing, very, very light stuff, and then just kind of haphazard, you know, paint on until I feel like it's just where I want it to be, until it looks fearsome. I don't necessarily do this for all weapons in Warhammer painting, but I definitely do it for the Cruel Boys because they're kind of supposed to look haphazard and jagged and like terribly forged together, but also in a way that makes them look more fearsome. That's kind of the point. So it works for Cruel Boys to just sort of haphazardly throw the white on there until it looks good. And then moving on to Screamer Pink, which is a paint that I had an epiphany about a few days ago. But we're going to be using this just on the underside of the Warg. During the live stream a couple of days ago when I was painting, I did realize that for most Warhammer painters, Screamer Pink is an extremely bright paint. Not for me though, not here on New Memphis. Oh no, here it's Screamer Pink is one of the darkest colors that I use. It's a mid-tone at best. I started out just sort of dry brushing, kind of just trying to apply it really, really lightly, and then a little more intense, and then a little more intense, and then a little more intense, until eventually I was just painting on a couple of sections here and there, but ultimately starting out very, very light. Skin tones are very easy to mess up, especially when you have these undertones that I want to make sure that we're, you know, maintaining and not just painting over all of the blue. And speaking of that, the next step is going to be the blue-green highlights, which are just on top of the warg, which I did completely mess up at first because I just let the paint get into all of the recesses when I was trying to dry brush, but started out way, way, way too intense. And that's on me, but fortunately I was able to fix it by going back with an extremely, extremely thin wash of our original Vallejo Royal Blue, which I just kind of mixed up on the fly. Now, there was quite a bit of fixing the bases in between there and this final dry brush of flat flesh. A lot of just going back, fixing the emerald, fixing the cork brown, because anytime you do a lot of dry brushing on a model, there's always going to be a few flecks, always going to be a few dots that you have to correct. I don't know what it is about that Royal and Langnickel paint once it's dried, but there's like this veiny kind of texture that comes out, and it looks so incredibly good. It looks so good with that highlight of flat flesh. Maybe it's just the pairing against the emerald, I don't know, but there's some kind of texture in there that's hidden until the flat flesh goes on there, and it looks so incredibly good. Can't describe it better than that. And that's probably the best segue that I'm possibly gonna have for us to just get on to the good part. I haven't been doing enough miniature painting the last couple of weeks, so thank God I was able to come back and finish this project. Thank you once again for you guys being here. I also hope you guys have an amazing day. Thank you so much for watching. You have all been amazing, and I will see you in the next one.